Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. Acha ji, welcome to another PIDE ideas or nurturing minds, or whatever you might call it. Another session to learn and think. Let's see what we do today. We've had a number of very interesting talks, and I think this is going to be another very interesting talk because we've got Raza Rumi here. I think everybody knows Raza Rumi. Raza Rumi has been a television star in Pakistan. Raza with his own program and God knows what else. Raza Rumi was also in the civil service. He was a DMG, please note, which is his claim to fame, first claim to fame, right Raza? He was a DMG. Raza Rumi has also been a donor consultant in a big way. But then, as you know, Raza Rumi was forced out of the country and he was sent to Cornell. So now he's the director of a Center for Innovative Media in Ithaca College, as well as teaches at the Center for Public Affairs in Cornell. I think Raza is an excellent speaker that everybody knows, but more importantly, Raza is a very nice thinker, so a very good thinker, and I'm hoping that he will give us a provocative talk today, because the only thing Raza is, because of civil service training, he doesn't like to be provocative. So let's see whether he can be provocative today or not. So he's going to talk about the political economy.
Yeah, well, politics, yeah.
No, what's the title? What was the title of the talk we announced?
I've forgotten. Development, politics, and donors.
That's what I wanted to get in.
Donors.
I wanted to get that in. So he's going to talk about political economy and donor coordination, if you choose. Donor-driven agenda. Right. So Raza, with that introduction, I'll welcome you to speak. Take as long as you like. Come on.
Thank you very much, Dr. Haq, and thank you for some very distinguished guests here, Harun Sharif, whom I've had the pleasure of both knowing and working with him, as well as other faculty and students. Thank you for the opportunity. I mean, I don't want to, maybe the Vice Chancellor has really raised your expectations, so it's not going to be that provocative or that insightful, because the title I discussed with Fahad, who organized this event, was I wanted to bring in the idea of politics and how that both impacts the development effectiveness, as well as how it also has a very clear mark over donor coordination and donor programming and approach to the country. So by way of introduction, I mean, I can, my civil service background was mentioned, and that's how I started my career, and during that time I took a secondment to the UN mission in Kosovo, where I was actually, so I was doing local government and local development here as an unelected official in 5 districts of the Punjab province, and then I moved to Kosovo, where I was posted in a municipality as municipal administrator on the border of Macedonia. And then I did not go back to civil service. I joined the Asian Development Bank, where with which I stayed for almost a decade, with a few breaks in between. And then ultimately I quit ADB as well, and I thought that maybe I should have a more control over my life and what I think and what I wanted to do in life, because all these structures and bureaucracies are especially, I mean, you know, they want you to think in a particular way, work in a particular way, and create a life which is very tailored to the larger organizational goals and format. But so what I'm going to say today, I mean, I don't want this to be a very long talk. I just want to talk about some of the you know, experiences I've had, and reflect a bit on my work with the donor agencies as well. Here, with the ADB, I stayed for a decade, as I mentioned, and in between I took a sabbatical and I was consulting a lot. That's when I was consulting for DFID under Mr. Harun Sharif's supervision, and so I'll have to watch what I say about DFID. But I also consulted for the World Bank, for the UNDP, UNICEF, USAID. I mean, there's a long list, both in Pakistan as well as in South Asia and Southeast Asia. These were the areas where I was working, but I'll focus more on Pakistan. I think the real dilemma of Pakistan's development history, which I'm sure most of you have read and heard from your professors, and it's nothing earth-shatteringly new, is that the classic phrase of growth without development by Easterley, which was analyzed as a riddle, as a problematic in Pakistan's context, that why we had spurts of high economic growth rates in the 1960s, 1980s, and more recently in the 2000s, early 2000s, and yet it did not translate into development results, especially when it comes to social sector outcomes and the kind of targets and improvements in quality of life. So the classic example is the Social Action Program, again very well documented, well researched, from the 1980s, and I mean it remains, I think, the most revealing example, where you had billions of rupees invested in the social sectors to offset the impact of an adjustment program, but then at the end of the decade, when the results were tabulated, the net enrollment in primary education had decreased, and in terms of other indices, they all had fallen. So this happened with a huge injection of resources, not just from the World Bank, but also from the government itself and from other bilateral agencies, including DFID and USAID. And I think a more recent manifestation of this problem has been, the heavy investments in the education sector, led, of course, by the World Bank, followed by DFID and USAID and EU. And I was actually looking at some of the figures a week ago. Since 2000, nearly $7,500 million have been put into various programs by both the donors and the governments. And the increases in enrollment, in net enrollment in the primary education sector, have been less than 10%. I mean, in real terms, about 7.5%. And in the secondary school level, it is even lower. And the official figures for, how many people can read or write, I mean, that's also a very contentious definition of literacy. That has been static. In fact, the numbers last year showed that there was a marginal decline in literacy. So that may, and they later said it was a computational error or something. So why are these resources, both from foreign aid and government's own efforts, not turning into results? I think that remains a struggle for the government and for the donors themselves, because that is what they put in all this money for. And what happens with the governmental structures and systems and the delivery mechanisms, especially at the local level, which is not addressed. So if we take the education sector, so the problem with the multilateral agencies, the World Bank, the regional development banks, or the IMF, is that their charter ostensibly prohibits them from addressing political issues or dabbling in or interfering in local political scene. Now that may be the case officially, but there are other ways with which big multilateral donors find a method to engage politically. And the bilateral agencies, on the other hand, are more directly involved in both the foreign policy or the political side of things, and maybe they have a far greater room to explore. But coming back to the multilateral aid, the general tendency has been to avoid the political complexity and the local political dynamics that shape and impact development policy and its implementation. So for instance, despite all these investments in the education sector, the World Bank and others, they have yet to address the fact that the education sector remains in the tight grip of centralized provincial bureaucracy. And take the case of the Punjab province, for example, where you have a population of nearly more than 100 million people, and one or two bureaucrats in the province are not only the policy makers, but they also oversee all the implementation of different programs, and the central question there is bypassed or ignored, and without which, unless that particular arrangement at the province level, whether it's the Punjab or Sindh or Balochistan or KP, until that is addressed, it is the same repetitive failure will occur. And of course, that brings to the question that decentralization experiments have also been made under General Musharraf. There was a big bang decentralization for a number of years until he had to make political compromises and start reversing the process to garner political support for his military rule. And the experiment started in 2001, and by 2008, when new elections were held, decentralization had been effectively and virtually rolled back, and all the powers and functions had been re-centralized. By 2010 or so, it was completely, within a decade, there was a whole process of re-centralization, which obviously has huge implications for both social services and for development programming and its implementation at a local level. And then again, another decentralization, half-hearted or so, took place in the previous government's tenure, and that also was, first of all, it was not an effective decentralization model. The provincial bureaucracy still retained all the powers, particularly in the social sectors and in terms of funds distribution to the local governments. And that too was the first, when this present government took over, the first thing they did was to undo and suspend all the local governments. Now the question is that, that is something that we all know that is essential if we have to make improvements in education, health and other social sector programming, and yet this question is bypassed, and you keep on investing into a broken, dysfunctional system of aid management and development implementation, basically. So I think that has, if we extend this to other sectors, take the case of health, or take the case of population planning and other big large-scale programs, it has not really worked. I mean, the only two examples which have been really successful in the past, let's say 30 years or so, are the two big programs which came into effect due to the political ownership and political will. So first is the Lady Health Workers Program, which is a stellar success by all standards, notwithstanding all the problems that are reported about its absent workers, or their lack of salaries, or their strikes. It has built a cadre of more than around 110,000 women at the grassroots that provide primary healthcare advice, as well as are now instruments of policy implementation in many other sectors too. The other example that we can cite is, of course, the Benazir Income Support Program, which is undergoing some kind of rebranding and restructuring, and there's some strategy at work, which I think should be clear in a couple of months, but that again, with all its warts and reported issues, it remains the most targeted, and in relative terms, of course, the most targeted and effective way of addressing poor women at the household level. So compare these two programs with all other large social sector interventions, and we can see the difference that the I think somebody mentioned donor-driven agenda, or something which we popularly term it as that. I think the key differential there is political ownership, and that brings us back to the role of what role do parliaments and provincial legislatures, what role do politicians at various tiers of government have in both the framing and implementation of development agenda in the country. And that has been a major problem, particularly with the multilateral agencies, because they find it more convenient to work with a small coterie of unelected bureaucrats at the central level, sign agreements, deal and do, and that is pitched as ownership. A finance secretary signing off on a loan of $700 million is the country ownership presented at the board or wherever, even in public domain. It's not ownership. I mean, there's been so much written about the whole notion and definitional context of ownership. In Pakistan, we still have to have a vigorous debate on what it actually entails and what it actually means within our political and governance structure. I think that is the biggest missing link when it comes to large-scale donor assistance, and partly responsible in large measure for the royal aid failures that we have seen in recent years. I can cite a number of programs that I worked on personally in the decade that I was with the ADB. So, for example, there is a very well-known agriculture sector program loan, which is, I think, a total of $500 million were disbursed to modernize agriculture sector, and all of that money was disbursed, and none of the agreed upon reforms, because it was a policy loan, were ever implemented. I think the total implementation of policy actions, even the evaluations of that program shows that less than 15% of the policy actions agreed were implemented, and 85% remained unimplemented, and $500 million worth loans were dispersed to the country. And that's a program after program, project after project. So there's another very famous, I think, phrase from a 1980s study where Pakistan was referred to as a graveyard of projects. I think that was the title of the study, or a subtitle. And once again, you will find multitude of projects, often in the same sector or the subsector. And despite all the efforts of coordination, and you have various parallel coordination mechanisms. One is at the UN level, the other one is with the government. Ostensibly coordinates through the Economic Affairs Division and its various wings, and yet in reality that coordination does not occur, because you have 7 similar projects in the same areas with the same targets on climate change by bilaterals and multilaterals, and the ministry is either absent in all of that conversation or implementation, or has very little minimal input in how those programs are formed. So aid duplication remains a major problem, despite all the notional and agreements that Pakistan has made into aid effectiveness and to other aid coordination protocols at the international and regional levels. And I think that is another big issue that impairs development effectiveness, and that also brings to light the role of the Economic Affairs Division, the central sort of hub for aid coordination, and which acts as a gatekeeper to all foreign assistance coming in the country. And although they have made some effort to rename some of the wings and perhaps add more capacity, quote unquote, but it still remains. I mean, it's a division that either should be abolished or it should be completely restructured and completely built anew, because it is not doing the kind of work that it is meant to do. I can give you comparative examples. Aid coordination is far more effective in Vietnam, for example, where you have a similar kind of a ministry with more specialized and technical staff working, and that can work with both donors and their representatives in designing aid programs. I think that is something, a debate that is yet to be really held within the government quarters, because there is a strong hold. I mean, the bureaucratic sheer force of the bureaucracy prohibits any kind of improvement in the way the EAD functions. I think Nadimul Haq has also worked with them very closely, and and I'm sure he will vouch for some of the statements that I'm making with regard to EAD. I think that is a major gap. And that also takes us to the other problem, which is to do with, so more and more development thinking and literature shows that you have to have greater resources invested in evaluations, and evaluations, not the kind of evaluations that are done by the World Bank and the ADB, which is when a big large-scale program has finished and you go and review $700 million, how they were spent, and they say, oh well, we tried our very best, but this did not happen and that did not happen. So for example, when I joined the Asian Development Bank and we had to evaluate some of the help the evaluation department with some of the programs, and they had really strange categories. So the categories were implementation was partly successful, unsuccessfully successful, successfully unsuccessful. All these opaque, unaccountable and vague terminology that was used to evaluate the effectiveness of the programs. And if you look at most evaluations, and that is the most startling. So you can take a random, those of you who are enrolled here at PIDE, I mean, just go to the World Bank evaluation website and choose any 10 big programs anywhere, not just Pakistan, and just go through the top page. You don't even have to read hundreds of pages, and you will be startled that most of them are not successful programs, and yet you have continuation. So you have this sector reform program 1, program 2, program 3, and obviously the kind of internal accountability which the donor agencies need to exercise, the oversight of the boards particularly, is missing. And that is once again another area where the governments, the national governments, have to intervene and ensure that what has been their learning from the particular engagement with a country. And I think that is so vital now, the idea of learning and doing midterm or early evaluations as you go along, because because if we define development as the through the end results that it is meant to achieve in any sector, then we ought to make those assessments as to where a particular program or its strategy is leading to, whether it is giving early results or not. So there is a new fad is the the problem-driven iterative approach, PDIA. You may have seen that, and that is now increasingly being adopted in many countries, where you say that you take an iterative view of the development path of the program implementation path, and you continue to change the design and even the goals as you go along, because it is so important to learn and correct the course rather than leave the learning and evaluation part for 5 years or 7 years and the resources have been wasted by then. So that, and I think the other complexity that now it's almost a decade old is the 18th Amendment in Pakistan, which has obviously altered both how we understand national resource distribution as well as the development policy, both in terms of design and implementation. A lot of subjects have now completely gone to the provinces. Some may, and those at the center are, are far fewer in number, let's say, than a decade ago. So, and yet, I think donors have to learn more and more as to how do they deal with this complex structure. Once again, their bureaucracies want to find simple solutions where they want to have one point of contact or a ministry at the central level, and that may make the task easier, and you get all the agreements and approvals, and then the province's participation is kind of either a given or ultimately bankrolled or bulldozed if needed. And I think that has also time and again not resulted in the kind of outcomes that these programs aim to achieve. And that also calls for better capacity at the provincial levels. Now, and that varies. So in Punjab province, you have a greater pool of bureaucrats compared to, let's say, Balochistan, where you may not have the sufficient donor engagement and coordination capacity. So the kind of what the provinces now need are mini reformed EADs, and how are they going to, then they must not replicate what is in Islamabad, because that will be just adding more troubles to the already big problems that Pakistan's development sector faces. But I think that some thinking needs to go there as to how the provincial both technical departments as well as administrative sort of parent administrative departments of many bodies at the subnational level can look at development programming and achieve it in a better way. I think the other important problem where, and when I talk about capacity, I also want to clarify that I'm not talking about the classic capacity building quote unquote approach that has also been prevalent in Pakistan for the last 30-40 years. If you look at the number of civil servants that have gone on different kinds of trainings or scholarships, short programs, EAD has a whole list of these foreign training wing they have, and Babus there keep it very close to them because they keep on nominating each other. So one year they're in Japan, then after 6 months they're in Washington DC, the next fall they're in London, and so it's a really murky understanding of what is known as capacity, and capacity building at the individual level is now also an outdated approach. This whole emphasis, and yet you will find that most programs here have all these training sessions. So every policy development document, again, take a random look at the 10 programs which are under implementation, you'll find 500 trainings in 5 years. 35,000 master trainers trained. What does that all mean? It has been going on. In fact, there's a World Bank study which shows that this individual training and individual training sessions is the least effective method of building anyone's capacity or any department's capacity. I think 67%. So they did a study where they interviewed people who had undergone these trainings, and 67% or so termed that particular training by the World Bank. So that was a brave thing that the World Bank did, termed it as a failure. And so that approach unfortunately still prevails very much, and is actually misused here. So there was this classic program on I forget its exact title, but it was about public sector training of civil servants by about $60 million worth of a loan, IDA loan, given to government of Pakistan, under which master's degrees were conferred on individual civil servants and short executive courses for the senior officials. Imagine $60 million, and Harvard Kennedy School was the implementing partner of the World Bank and the government of Pakistan. And I think under that program they also thought of building this National School of Public Policy, and I know at least 24 people who went for these masters or short programs, and when they came back, they were not posted in the kind of specializations that they had chosen, and which is the classic thing with foreign training or even in-country training, where you have civil servants attending a lot of expensive programs, either in the West or in Japan or wherever, and that is misused. And I think the World Bank did not, or even for that matter Harvard did not care to bother to look at what had happened with the results. And the fact that Harvard was named as a partner, I think it's a classic case of soft corruption, which is often talked about in the about we also have this corruption discourse in Pakistan, but if you look at all the donor or international agencies reporting on Pakistan, then they always have a paragraph, but due to rampant corruption, XY, blah blah blah. And the thing is that donor practices themselves are so questionable and so murky at times, so how come Harvard Kennedy School was chosen as a single source of training by the World Bank itself, and how come the government of Pakistan signed off on it, and why are the people of Pakistan repaying that loan of $60 million, for what purpose, to what end, and with what results? I think these are the questions that really need to be both asked and not just within the country, but I think within these large donor bureaucracies. And that takes us to the whole notion of aid accountability. There has been a debate of mutual accountability, where the donors do check, well, have you spent the money on the bridges or the ports or the roads or the schools that we agreed to build, but nobody actually checks on how the countries don't check as to how come you have programmed all of these and earmarked all of these resources, and why did your internal control mechanisms were not sufficient in terms of checking the malfeasance. I mean, the most recent case is that of the Peshawar BRT, which is now in the news, where the Asian Development Bank has itself in its official documents hinted at both misallocation and misutilization of the assistance provided in the construction of BRT, and the government obviously does not really want to go ahead with an inquiry, and they're trying very best to not have it. But I think what about the Asian Development Bank? Should it not be impressing upon the government that it entered into an agreement with, as to why don't you investigate this, and we are not going to give you more money unless you do that? But that would not happen, because the real incentive within the multilateral institutions, particularly those which lend money for the individual bureaucrats, is all about lending. The lending targets make or break you. If you have pushed more money onto poor countries, you get a promotion, you get a medal, you get the next step, the next grade, and that is the sole criterion for success of an aid bureaucrat within the multilateral institutions. It's different for the bilateral ones, because they have more flexibility. They are working at the local sort of country policy context. But for the large donors, and our foreign aid is primarily largely multilateral in nature, this kind of mutual accountability system does not exist. And again, it requires a more a better staffed, a better equipped economic affairs division and other bodies that can actually undertake that task of holding the aid agencies accountable. And I think I'll end with and then maybe we can have a bit of interaction, end with the idea that, the real challenge we have here is also the dysfunctionality that we see in terms of our parliament and our provincial legislatures not doing the kind of oversight work that they are meant to do. So we have a public accounts committee which works for a couple of years, and now it's totally dysfunctional for the last two and a half years. And that is another forum where both the executive policies and allocation of resources, both with respect to aid and even for the domestic resources, I mean, they need to be better monitored and held accountable. And I think that essentially would require a major rethinking as to how we look at foreign aid, how we engage with donors, and how we can hold them accountable, as well as our national agencies, in terms of delivery of foreign aid. So I'll end there.
Thank you. I think that was very good. I take my hats off to Raza. I totally take back my remark that he's not provocative. Today he was quite provocative. Raza, what happened to you? Cornelia was suiting you. Cornelia is... As somebody told another friend of ours who started talking like me, he said, don't follow him, your career will go. So I just didn't be careful. But anyway, I think that was a very good presentation. I really liked it, and I think particularly why I'm pleased is because I think this is something that our people need to hear. I think you made a very good presentation that, look, we have resources. Resources coming from the world, we have resources, everything, but we are faced with failure time and time again. 73 years of failure, 74 years of failure. And let's own it. Because the chief economist sitting here too, former chief economist, he'll comment on it too. But the key question that you raised, I think, is very important, that we've got the bureaucracy here as well as the bureaucracy out there. So that bureaucracy is only serving its own interests. I've been there, you've been there. I was IMF, in the IMF for 30 years. I used to tell people in the country where I worked, guys, we're leaving a report. My advice is don't read it. This is for my masters. This is not for you. My career is going to be made on this report. But if you follow it, you're the bloody fools. Simple. So I think you're absolutely right. But then there are 2 or 3 things that I want to raise before I take questions very quickly. Very quick questions on that. Was not aid supposed to end at some point? Is it ever going to end? Are we going to always be poor? Are we always going to be receiving aid? If that is the case, is the new colonialism really just giving us aid? It is cheaper for them to keep us intellectually confined rather than physically confined as they did before, right? So, first thing is, will aid ever end? And the second thing that I want to ask you is, who makes policy in Pakistan? Is it the donors, or do we make policy? And I don't think we make policy. That's my take. The third thing that I would like to ask you is, you did mention it, but I think it's very clear. The fact is that we've never really thought about our state. We have a colonial state, we keep running the colonial state, we have a colonial constitution, 1935 Government of India Act. How do we expect that constitution to work? How do we expect the colonial state to work in the national interest or in the independent interest? It has to work for the colonial outfit, which is the aid. So, am I reading it right, or is this wrong?
No, I think these are very valid questions. I wanted to keep, I didn't want to go to the post-colonial state to business, but I think that obviously has a huge impact on, I mentioned the education sector, for example. So in the Punjab province, which is again supposedly with better capacity, instead of devolving powers to the local education structures, they've created more secretaries. So you have secretary for primary schools, secretary for secondary schools, secretary for higher education, secretary for special secretary, 3 of them.
So instead of, what they have done is they're expanding more and more senior provincial powers rather than, so it's a horizontal transfer of power, from one secretary going to 7 or 8 of them and not going downwards. And because of my civil service experience for a decade again, I mean, I remember we were asked to go and check schools if the teachers were there or not. That was the first tenure of Shabash Sharif. So there were these orders to go and check the basic health units, check the schools, and teachers were absent or whatever. But the system at the local district and the sub-district level is dysfunctional. The way it is organized, the way the kind of systems that are in place. So for example, every teacher's salary, 5 to 20% is deducted by the accountant. First of all, it's late often, and 5 to 10%, I used to make this estimate, is cut by the accountant because that goes as an unstated bribe. And that 20%, imagine if 10,000 teachers in a big district, so calculate the numbers, and then those are shared among the tiers of bureaucracy. So obviously the teachers are not going to show up. What incentive do they have? And then the accountant overlooks the attendance issue. So you have the issue of absenteeism, and there's so much theorizing about absenteeism and blah blah blah. I mean, these are problems very well known. Any person at the local level, either in the Punjab or Sindh province, will identify very clearly why teachers don't show up, why health practitioners don't show up, why family planning workers don't show up, why agricultural extension workers don't show up to work. Because there's this complete distorted, broken system of accountability at the local level. And instead of working on that, there's provincialization and re-centralization. Once again, we have this whole quest for, if you look at media, they want to undo 18th Amendment for whatever reasons. The reasons, let's not go in there. But there is always this push to re-centralize, and while what we really need is that in key areas we need more decentralization and break the colonial state.
But I think there's another question, Raza, that I raise, this last question. This push for re-centralization and 18th Amendment also came from the donors, by the way.
Yes.
See, I myself started when I was in 2013.
That's right.
And the World Bank has been pushing it every time. The narrative started.
Yeah.
And this brings me to the narrative. Who creates the narrative in Pakistan? You remember I wrote this article a long time ago in Project Syndicate. There are two narratives in the government in this country. One is the liberal narrative that you and I are a part of, which is trying to set up development, etc. We're losing clearly. That narrative is led by the donors. The other narrative is the mullahs who are winning, clearly, because that's the homegrown narrative, ours is the foreign narrative. But in this narrative, I think the key role that is missing is that of this community.
Absolutely.
The intellectual community has been thrown by the donors, like when I asked these guys what topics they're working on, I'm working on gender and forests. I'm working on estimating the demand for agriculture. I'm working on the environment of eco or something, some strange things. They will never work on the topics central to Pakistan. They will never look at the role of EAD, the role of planning. They will never look at the role of how this narrative is established. We have never read the World Bank evaluations, as you said. No researcher of ours is ever working on aid effectiveness or a World Bank evaluation or anything.
It's a must read.
This is our fault. This is our fault, isn't it? So I think in your next presentation you must bring out this bloody intellectual class that we have created here through the capacity building that is totally incapable of addressing the problems in this country. So I leave it to you.
Yeah, I'll quickly comment on that, because I mean I think you have so this goes back to the formation of a discourse. Who creates the discourses, whether it's a political discourse, and here we are talking about a discourse on development and economic and social change. The theory of change, as DFID very famously has has put forward, and we all are schooled in it. So the discourse is very, and you're absolutely right, is very much a function of the donors. Very much a function of, in fact, and if you look at globally, the World Bank and the IMF lead the construction of what ails Latin America. The World Bank staff in DC will tell you. in Chile what is going on, or what's happened in Nepal. Some expert there will tell you, well, 5, 7 problems. There you go. And unfortunately, that is linked to the kind of neo-colonial arrangement that we are talking about, how aid is used as an instrument. Now look at the case of Pakistan now. I mean, 2 examples. The first example is how ultimately Pakistan is back with the IMF. I mean, we had no choice, but the thing is that we are back to the square one. And in terms of that, the kind of conditions that we have worked on and the kind of policy which is now being sort of bankrolled, if to use the phrase, with disastrous, with some of the consequences, some of those choices could have been reimagined, could have been rethought, had we created that particular capacity or critical mass of expertise within our key ministries. And if we really have to say this, and if you want me to say this, you know, what could be more alarming than the fact that an ex-World Bank employee is asked to replace a homegrown finance wizard of an elected government, brought into back, and the guy who has worked earlier and did not really deliver. I mean, you know, and this is not a personal attack, but you know, the record is there. Just seven years ago. I mean, again, we don't want to look at that. And a serving IMF official, with due apologies to you, Mr. Huck, is brought in and put as the state bank governor. And again, he's from my school, so you know, it's not a personal attack, he's my friend. And he's a bright chap. But it cannot be more brazen and naked as that, to the point that you have highlighted. It is a travesty that in Pakistan's academia, in Pakistan's pool of economists, we have PT here, that they could not find 3 people who could take over, or in Pakistan's large banking, you know. So what is happening here? It's happening because, you know, ultimately the IMF deal is also linked to a larger reset of relations with the US. You know, that's how it's happening. And the second, you know, example is this whole, the Saudi business that, I mean, you know, with which they are now telling us which choices to take, and we will make more choices. So it's a very clear, palpable case of a weak state, a financially mismanaged state, seeking external bailouts and accepting blindly the conditions that are imposed on. And this takes us back to the question of policy. So, you know, your first question was, who makes this policy? So, you know, this policy is very clearly, I mean, the economic policy that we have now is largely the Washington consensus, or a particular reading of the IMF and World Bank understanding of Pakistan's economy. And that, and I think I will also go back to, I think we can't really blame the donors 100% on that. I think one of the major failures of successive governments, not just is not to invest in the research institutions. So, you know, institutions like PIDE, which was once sort of the powerhouse, the brain of Pakistan's economic policy and economic thinking, and at the provincial level. So, you know, there was a project with which I worked with Mr. Sharif, who's here, to change the Bureau of Statistics in the Punjab, and the other, you know, the Perry Punjab Economic Research. I don't know what happened to them. And, you know, the Chief Minister agreed to change those institutions. But the Bureau, so the Chief Minister gave a go-ahead in a meeting that we had a long discussion with him, and the bureaucrats sabotaged it. Within the next 3 months, they had completely reversed. They said, we're not going to change that, because let them be these weak, under-resourced, understaffed, underfunded institutions. And same goes for the central level. And that is where your question arises, that what happens to our experts, our academia, our thinkers. So sadly, until we don't invest in it, and once again, when we want to improve them, we go to the donors. That's the whole irony. Oh, I want to fix the FBS. I mean, I forgot to mention that the World Bank has come back with a third loan to improve tax collection and to do capacity building of FBR. It's the third loan, and obviously everybody reads in the papers that we are not collecting the taxes, we are missing every target every quarter. I mean, in fact, this time, and yet there's a third investment in that. What is it for? Who is monitoring that? Who is checking that? And then why do we need an expensive loan to essentially fix some very basic issues that we all know? So this whole opaque, bizarre aid decision making is really, because and when the first program of if you look at it again, I looked at an official document some years ago, it has not been a success. If FBI was working properly, we would have known by now, but it's not. All the efforts are going in that direction under the present government. But obviously, the World Bank seems to be blind to that, and our bureaucrats who signed that deal are also blind to that. So I think that particular unholy nexus, it remains a major perennial problem.
Okay, folks, we've got a lot to chew on. So please go ahead. Madhya, go ahead.
Which is what I believe is that it's a result of MTC's result of SAP performance that the developing countries did not deliver on the funding that came from abroad, and I think it's sort of a commitment made developing countries made to commit so that some sort of performance can come out from donors funding. This is my understanding. So I would like to ask, what is your take about SDGs, and how do you think that will it be creating a dependency in some way? And why I'm asking, because all those things seem very relevant, but they may not be what when you go to grassroots level for delivery, they may not be what people want. They may just want jobs and employment and education, and not a policy on climate change, because that may not be relevant.
कुछ सवाल इकट्ठे कर लें before you reply. Just go ahead. Anybody else? Arun? Vicky?
Students should ask.
हाँ जी बोले, कोई पीछे से कोई है बोले. Hello, go ahead. जी नहीं. बोले, और कोई लड़की भी पूछे यार. Don't be shy. Gender पे काम करना तो gender करेंगे.
Thank you for a broad presentation. My question is about lady health worker and VISP. You have mentioned that these are the most effective social intervention programs. However, I would disagree with your
Please do.
agreement on VISP. That I think it basically it incentivizes to be remain poor in the society. And research shows that especially cash transfer are the most ineffective transfer social intervention programs. And in this context, we are very late from the rest of the world, especially in the Latin American. These types of programs have been started in the 1990s, and now they move to the condition cash transfer. And I think in the next step, they now move to the skill program. So in this context, basically, VISP, let's an example in this room, we are all above the poverty line, but nobody will refuse to take money. Basically, how is it possible that it is the second most effective social intervention program in Pakistan?
हाँ जी. कौन जी? और कोई? उधर देख लें कौन है? वहाँ कोई है? वो पीछे कोई है मैडम? Nobody? क्यों जी? Okay.
Arun sir.
Well, thank you very much. सबसे पहले तो congratulations on raising this subject. By you have learned through the system, which is also so did I.
Yes.
But I would like to raise a point and would like to have your comment on that. It was an excellent critique to look at the situation over the past several years. What I would like to understand better, which I am struggling since I ended up spending a year on the other side very recently. that, what actually is donor influence or international organizations influence increasing, or in this changing geopolitics, actually it will be challenged in the coming days. So why I'm saying so is that the case of Pakistan is very interesting, because for years the programs you mentioned were coming from Western donors. Now suddenly the money started flowing from China. We reached out to neighbors in the Middle East without thinking, I must say. I was part of all these travels and deals. But I'm trying to say the first question to you is that I very clearly see bilateral aid moving out of Asia as the Asia grows. So that is something I would like to comment on. Second thing is that it's actually fascinating. Before joining, and I can now reveal that, when I was a senior advisor to the World Bank, the World Bank at the highest level, at the level of the President of the World Bank, approached me that can you arrange a meeting with Mr. Imran? Because they were told that the gentleman did not believe in multilateral system. And in KPK, they refused to take any assistance for that. So for my sins, I arranged that meeting. And that is where all I'm trying to say
Many
is,
sins, by the way.
among many sins in that meeting. No, but the point I'm trying to raise is a different. So there was a very clear ideological discussion which took place, and our current Prime Minister and the former Finance Minister were part of that. And they, made a very compelling story that we only want to borrow for the projects. First of all, they made a distinction between borrowing and aid. Then they said we really want to borrow for the project which has a commercial return where we can repay it, i.e. no budget support, no governance, no capacity building, everything. So they actually said all the right things, and frankly speaking, I was impressed.
No competitiveness.
So this debate took place, and the World Bank promised that they will actually, work on those lines with KPK. So my question, Raza, here is that the same elite which is now ruling is now actually making populist statements that World Bank is endorsing our policies. World Bank is saying that we are doing good. IMF is actually saying that we are on the right track. So in the course of 1 year, who changes their thinking? And is it pure politics? Is it prophecy? Is it a global, pressure? So it's interesting to actually go deeper into that how, rather than blaming the bureaucrats, how the political elite thinks about this whole scene. Thanks.
Let me add something to it. Correct? I think the central question has been raised by her. What happens if perfectly reasonable people start doing the same? Okay. This is what happens. Why does it happen? Let me start with this story. In the 60s, for the first time there was this talk about educated unemployed. And there were issues and high growth and so on, but this issue came up in public space. The government set up a manpower commission. The manpower commission made some recommendations. Look at the recommendations. We should have a ministry of manpower. Okay. They had a ministry of manpower. Then the ministry became a division and appointed a secretary who knew nothing about manpower, and then they appointed an additional secretary, and then a joint secretary, then a deputy secretary, and when they had done all this, they got together in a meeting. But who is going to do the work? Because we are just the central sultans. So they came up with this place near 0 point called Pakistan Manpower Institute. and quickly with donor assistance recruited some professionals. Now, I don't think anybody talks about that institute anymore. So you can see this is how problems come up and this is how they are addressed. All you see is more jobs for the office. That is the crux of the problem. Civil service reform. Civil service immediately after independence had some competence because the life was simple. The issue was law and order. But not anymore. And don't always say that this is because of colonial legacy and so on. In colonial days, primary schools, high schools were managed at the district level. I went to a municipality school myself, and it wasn't too bad. Okay? What has happened is that power have been concentrated in these hands. And look at the way we do civil service reform. The first thing they did was they promoted 22% to grade 22. So you should get rid of some of them because after the 18th Amendment you don't need more than 4 or 5 minutes. So this is actually the problem. Civil service reform. If you cannot do, you see, why should you have a centralized police service after 18th Amendment? Why should you have centralized civil service? Why? There is no reason for it. And of course the issue that federal government has, of course, decentralized, but provincial governments are not decentralized. Why? We need to address that question. And one more thing. You talked about social action programs. I just want to take it up because this is an interesting example. There were 2 programs actually. There was social action program and there was a double P, SAP, when it became a donor project. The initial social action program was thought up domestically. The subsectors were chosen domestically. The entire thinking was done within the planning commission. And the program was started and resources were mobilized for the first 2-3 years domestically. There was ownership and some, if you look at data, there was some results. But the moment it caught the attention of donors, that Pakistan is actually doing something in the social.
Yeah.
You see, that what happened? You see, that project unit, PMU, management unit, and so on. And all these appointments lead to corruption. If you don't think for yourself, if you don't do things yourself, if you don't use your own resources, nothing will change. Who says that we did not have an alternative to IMF? Who says that? They should be talking to me and the Rumi.
And it's fun.
Thank you, Ji. Very interesting talk and the discussion thereafter. You hit the nail on the head. I'd like to word it slightly different. One reason is I'm not an economist. I'm a lab scientist who happened to work in the planning commission for 4 years. And initially science, technology, industry, higher education, and social sector also came under my purview for about a year. And what is my take on the planning commission? It has no institutional method. It fudges data like even more than the FBS. I can give many examples of this. But just small one. In 2005 they were making for a 5-year plan, and they said after 5 years our GDP will double. And they prepared a few chapters, and I was asked to look at the English of some of those chapters. I just joined in January 2005. And I read some, and I said, sorry, it's not the English, it's the content. I'll give you an example. The education figures curve, when the section was going up and up and up, primary enrollment. I said, does it happen even in science? These are people. There have to be little wiggles up and down. Ask for the raw data. Now 26 million primary enrollment, 4 million disappeared. What's the matter? See, everybody wants to look better and better and better. So that's one example. Then I wanted to know about what the donors do in Pakistan. And the first thing I learned was about the public toilets which were funded by Holland, Netherlands. I think there was a couple of €100,000. 3 public toilets, the designing and construction was done by them. And 89–90% of the money went to the consultant. That's another story. So, one thing is, you very strongly and rightly pointed out, the delivery of services has to take place at the local level. That is absolutely crucial. But this doesn't happen unless the government has a commitment. And the government has to let go. It's not the cities or the big 5 provincial headquarters that are going to run this. It's not about this. Something has been said. When I got the social sector also, this was coming up, People's Party government. So I started reading a lot, talking to people, and the conditional cash transfers, Bolsa Familia program, Solidarios in Mexico, Bolsa Familia in Brazil. There is a small, let's say, community health center. And if a woman goes there for the first 1 year, immunization, vaccination, etc., maternal health of the child, you get paid only if you go and report there, and the doctors look after you. You extend it to 5 years and then to 10 years recently, as somebody pointed out, skills. So what I did was, I looked for nominations from the provincial governments, and about 5–6 people were sent off. The nearest place to go to now is send one person to Brazil, and then to, I think it was Thailand, where they're also trying to duplicate the program. They came back, and they could not write. They could not write what they're seeing in Thailand. They spent 10 days there. Unbelievable. So the rot is not just at the top, in the sense of the Sultan and everybody. How did these people come? Same with microfinance, which you directly include on valuation. And sir, the FBS data everywhere is very, very dodgy. But even if you have the latest number, 34% have just been 1 year education of our 12 to 17 age. 78% of our workers have less than 8 years of education. And sir, let me share something personal with you. The young people are very interested. I go and collect fresh milk every second day from the Gawalas in the I met the Gawalas' younger son, 2016. I'm sorry to take so much time, but it's been relevant with all what's wrong in Pakistan. And he had this mobile phone, went over to the Gawala, become very active. And he said, "Beta, kya karte ho?" He's asking me about it. He's very happy. There's some social mobility, social engineering happening here. Gawala's son doesn't want to be a Gawala. I said, "Where do you go?" Goldwadi school है वहाँ. Government का school, नहीं government का school बड़ा खराब था मेरे अब्बा ने मुझे private school में डाला. I was completely floored. This is the future Pakistan. What do they teach you? I studied Islamiyat, Urdu, English, Science, Geography, History. He named about 8 subjects. What do you like the best? History and geography. History कहाँ से शुरू करते थे? अयूब खान से अल्फा करीम तक. उससे पहले वो तो कोई नहीं पढ़ा नहीं. मैं कहा याकूब खान का पता है? मैं नहीं देखा. वो कौन सी? यदि ज्योग्राफी का पूछे. मैं कहीं चमन में ट्रैक बहुत होता पूछे भी नहीं. चमन का पता है? चमन का मतलब बाग होता है. मैं नहीं बाग होता. और पूछे. हैदराबाद मैं नहीं जानता. मैंने सोचा यार जो भी है मोहम्मद गजनवी को तो जानते हो ना. अरे कौन से सेक्टर में रहते हैं? That is the criteria. Education at the local level, quality education, proper, and for this, the local communities have to, let's say, have the ownership of this. That's the only way for it to happen.
Very good. So I think about SDGs, SDGs are statements of good intentions. जैसे कभी ना चोरी नहीं करनी चाहिए, झूठ नहीं बोलना चाहिए, इसलिए गरीबी घटानी। सो एक कॉमन ग्लोबल एजेंडा है और पाकिस्तान ने उसको कमिट किया है, बाकी दीगर ममालिक की तरह। सो आई थिंक दैट्स काइंड ऑफ द expression of commitment that Pakistan has, and now how far are we going to go and implement that? That's a question that again links back to all the discussion that we've had about the resources, who implements the social sector programs. Most of the SDGs have to do with social, water and other things. About the climate change, I think yes, people, obviously immediate needs of people are jobs and a sustainable livelihood. But I think given the fact that Pakistan is like in the third or the fourth most vulnerable country to climate change in the region, there's absolutely no preparation for that. We have a policy, I believe, which was drafted. Nobody really knows what has happened to it. In fact, it has not. Its implementation has not even begun. Jalasti policy, and we don't have that kind of official attention, and we don't have that public awareness. We don't have the kind of media engagement that we need for climate change. और वो लोगों को जब तक वो शऊर नहीं आएगा कि अगर आप टॉक्सिक हवा से मर जाएंगे या पानी से, या तो फिर कौन सा रोजगार और कौन सा लाइवलीहुड। सो आई थिंक वो उसको फ्रेम करना, और क्लाइमेट चेंज का सिर्फ वो नहीं, क्लाइमेट चेंज के अंदर भी सस्टेनेबिलिटी लाइवलीहुड का पूरा जिक्र है, क्योंकि अगर ये इस तरह से चलती रहेगी तो जो फार्मर्स हैं वो सबसे पहले सफर करेंगे, क्योंकि एग्रीकल्चर क्रॉप साइकिल जो है वो बदल रहा है। वो ऑलरेडी बहुत ममालिक में, हमारे यहाँ भी इसमें चेंजेस, रेनफॉल बदलेगा, वेदर सिस्टम्स जो ऑलरेडी बदल रहे हैं, इरेक्टिक आ रहे हैं। तो आई थिंक वो उसको फ्रेम करने की इस तरह से ज़रूरत है। SDGs की जो अच्छी चीज़ है वो ये है कि वो एक बड़ा क्लियर रोड मैप देते हैं हमें, लेकिन उसका प्रॉब्लम ये है कि अगेन वो डोनर जो है ना थिंकिंग उससे फिर लिंक हो जाता है। वो वहीं पे उसको फिर खाने भरने के लिए ना, पुर करने के लिए फिर वो हमारे सारे मिनिस्ट्रियाँ और अफसरान जो है वो उसके ऊपर दे वांट चेक बॉक्सेस, we've done this, ऑफिशियल कंप्लायंस जो कहते हैं, वो एक मैकेनिज्म बताता है। उसको ब्रेक करने की जरूरत है। आपने वो लेडी हेल्थ वर्कर्स की और बिस की बात की, देखें मैंने आपको बताया इन रिलेटिव टर्म्स, we compare large scale program to another large scale program, and we look at how it has been designed, targeted and delivered. So evaluations matter. So evaluations जो है तीन तरह की प्रोग्रेसेस उसकी वो मिलती हैं, जो डेटा अवेलेबल है। एक तो सरकारी जो उनके होते हैं आदाद-ओ-शुमार, but if you also look at the World Bank, because World Bank puts in a lot of money in that, DFID puts in a lot of money, and USAID for many years at the start was supporting it. And if you look at their official documents, which have results, at least so-called independent evaluations, you'll find that compared to other such larger programs, उसकी delivery 60 to 70% targeted थी। उसकी जो और ये बड़ा मुश्किल काम हो रहा है पाकिस्तान में इतना बड़ा, और मैं समझता हूँ कि ये हम कैपेसिटी की बात करते हैं, बिस ने एक और चीज़ हमें शो की है, और वो ये की है कि पाकिस्तान की जो स्टेट है उसमें मुकम्मल फुल कैपेसिटी है कि वो टारगेटिंग भी कर सकती है, और वो उसके पास डेटा भी है। शनाख्ती कार्ड की बुनियाद पर बैंकिंग निज़ाम से किसी एक घर के फर्द तक पहुंचने का सारा सिस्टम मौजूद है। सिर्फ उसको किस तरह से चलाया जाता है, उसको किस तरह से बिल्ड किया जाता है, इस्तेमाल किया जाता है, वो एक अलग सवाल है। बाकी about conditional versus unconditional, you also raised that. So I think this is moving towards conditional, वसीला रोजगार, वसीला तालीम। So gradual उनकी वो graduation हो रही है towards conditional transfers. Conditional transfers जो होते हैं वो उनके जो experiments हुए हैं ब्राज़ील में, मैक्सिको में, वो उनकी जो initial था मसला उसके लिए आपको एक बेसिक आप ये याद रखिए कि मेक्सिको और ब्राज़ील हमसे मुख्तलिफ इसलिए है कि एक तो बहुत ज़्यादा ऑर्गेनाइज्ड है पाकिस्तान की बजाय, दूसरा वहाँ पे तालीम जो है पिछले 30-40 साल में वहाँ पर एक इनकलाब आया कि अपने एजुकेशन के सेक्टर्स एनरोलमेंट both at primary, secondary and higher education they have increased manifold और उसकी लार्ज वजह अर्बनाइजेशन भी है और वो वहाँ पर जो है कंडीशनल कैश ग्रांट्स का जो है वो भी मुश्किल हुआ था शुरू में और आई थिंक हमें भी मूव करना चाहिए और बिल्कुल ये स्टैटिक नहीं होता, लेकिन अगर आप ये कहें कि किसी को टारगेट करके कुछ इमदाद पहुँचानी है एड या वही चीज़ होती है ना, तो वो उस लिहाज से एक इफेक्टिव डिलीवरी मैकेनिज्म, लेकिन उसकी टाइप भी करें आपको। आई वाज गिविंग यू एन एग्जांपल ऑफ समथिंग व्हिच हैज फुल पॉलिटिकल ओनरशिप, यूजेस स्टेट रिसोर्सेज, यूजेस द स्टेट implementational tools and reaches they haven't set up हमारे यहाँ हर दोनों PMU बना लेते हैं, प्रोग्राम मैनेजमेंट यूनिट। एक जमाना था कि जब मैं 2005 की बात है, हमने काउंट किया था, there were 56 PMUs in Islamabad, 56 program management units और वो हर डोनर का अपना PM,
half of them set up by him.
not half of it, maybe 3. So the thing is कि ये तरीका कार होता है कि भाई डोनर ने पैसे लाए, वो अपना इम्प्लीमेंटेशन मैकेनिज्म भी बना रहे हैं, तो गवर्नमेंट की फिर वो कैपेसिटी के नाम पर, लेकिन गवर्नमेंट की कैपेसिटी बनती नहीं है। तो आप इसलिए मैंने वो हवाला दिया था कि जहाँ पे पॉलिटिकल ओनरशिप होती है, जहाँ पे आप ग्रास रूट्स जो है अप्रोच अडॉप्ट करते हैं, तो उसके रिजल्ट्स कहीं बेहतर होते हैं। I think Harun Saab raised, this is a very big question about the geopolitical. I think that yes, you are absolutely right. So the banks like the Asian Development Bank are already facing a existential crisis because China has emerged as this big major player in Asia. So Cambodia, Laos, PDR, which is the other third country, they have already reduced borrowing from ADB because Chinese give them no strings, no policy action, here you go, whatever money you need. So there is this competition. But I think in Pakistan's example, I think the phase of look east or look at China is at least temporarily over, because since last year we are in a process of resetting our relationship with the West. And one of the pillars of our relationship with the West is is Mr. Huck's former institution, and the World Bank, of course. So I think if in the long term, yes, you're right that China thing will weigh in, but at the moment I don't see it happening at least for a decade. We have in the next 3 to 4 years we have between 40 to 50 billion dollars of repayments, I think, in the next 4 years or so. And for that you need not just the IMF, you also need the ancillary related lending institutions and their support. So I think it's a case of, but over time I see what you're suggesting, and that will change the dynamics as well. Civil service reform, I mean, I fully agree with you, लेकिन problem here है कि civil service reform has also become a bit of a mantra. Every government wants to do it. I think if Dr. Ishat's commission was the 9th federal commission or so to come up with an elaborate strategy to implement reform.
And 2 of them by Ishat Hussain himself.
जी बिल्कुल, वो सब उन्होंने किए। प्रॉब्लम ये है कि उसके बगैर हमारी जो कॉलोनियल स्टेट की बात है या डिसफंक्शनलिटी की बात जी उसके बगैर मुमकिन ही नहीं है। इवन एड की प्रोग्रामिंग और डिलीवरी जब तक उसको ठीक नहीं करते वो नहीं है, लेकिन उसका जो सबसे बड़ा इम्पेडिमेंट है मेरे ख्याल से वही बात है कि जो हमारी इलीट ब्यूरोक्रेसी है और आपका जो सवाल था कि इनको क्या हो जाता है पॉलिटिकल एलिट्स को, आई थिंक उसमें आई वुड से कि उसमें ब्यूरोक्रेट्स का बहुत रोल होता है। फाइनेंस, द वे द फाइनेंस मिनिस्ट्री, एंड इवन most of you are familiar how it works, is finance ministry is not a purely indigenous thinking ministry. It's a big collection of senior, junior, mid-level babus running around the system to implement most of the donor conditions and prepare copy-paste budgets. So the budget process, which I had a chance to look at the province and the central level, it's absolutely shocking that they take last year's budget and then they start adding numbers. So and that they term as a very complicated process, and we talk to them. We are in the process of budget finalization as if there's some kind of strategizing going on or some thinking, but it is actually such a moribund cut and paste job, and that's why it doesn't really mean anything. If a budget is an indication of policy priorities of a country, of a particular government, the budgets are falling short of that. I think that's so. Civil service reform, I don't know who and how I don't know. I don't think, and I don't foresee even with a minister dedicated in the present government to get civil service reform going is not going to happen.
I should have said it clearly, it should be a project.
Yeah.
Not be reform.
जी और आखिरी बस मैं ये की बात वो जो आप I agree with all your points. I think about the planning commission as well. In fact वो इसकी memory है ही नहीं, because मैं when Mr. Nadeem Haq was the chair there, I think I worked like for months and months on something on social protection with UNICEF, and even I was looking at those reports and then wondered what happened to all of that. So I think one of the most depressing parts of work, development work, is that you churn out hundreds and hundreds of reports each year, which nobody reads, which are procedural pro forma exercises, because somebody has to submit it to one part of the government, somebody has to then get paid as a consultant or as a company or whatever, and it has no link to either development thinking. And even all that, and part of the reason I'm not actively in development is this cynicism about the fact that so what, because why do all of this? And I think उसमें जो एक चीज मैं कहना भूल गया था donors के बारे में और government के दोनों, especially donors के बारे में, कि उनका all the ideas that are generated, even though they criticize them and etc., उनकी distillation और उनकी public जो है communication है ही नहीं उसका. In fact, there again, if you search, you'll find out that the World Bank was very upset, I think 3 years ago, when they discovered, because they had built अपनी portal को बहुत बड़ा कर दिया था, और मेरे ख्याल से 60% उनकी जो रिपोर्टें थी वो किसी ने PDF डाउनलोड नहीं किया था. बड़ी रिपोर्टें कंट्री की, रीजन की, और ये और फलाना धमाका, और वो इसके ऊपर बहुत आप याद होगा फाइनेंशियल टाइम्स ने स्टोरी की थी कि बड़े परेशान थे, हम क्या करें, हम इतना कुछ प्रोड्यूस करते हैं, कोई पढ़ता ही नहीं खोल के. तो वहाँ भी यही ग्लोबली ये सिर्फ पाकिस्तान का मसला नहीं है, लेकिन आई थिंक पाकिस्तान में ये इसलिए ज़रूरी है कि जो काम होता है उसकी बेसिस के ऊपर यू कैन जनरेट डिबेट्स, जो कि अक्सर क्लोज डोर होती हैं. वो इतना ज़्यादा एक वो रूटीन बन गई है कि आप 5 स्टार या 4 स्टार होटल में वर्कशॉप ऑर्गेनाइज करते हैं, उसमें एजेंडा होता है, उसमें प्रेजेंटेशंस होती हैं, उसमें वही 25-30 लोग, वो कभी कंसल्टेंट होते हैं, कभी वो थिंकर होते हैं, कभी वो रिसर्चर होते हैं,
कभी वो मिनिस्टर
और कभी वो मिनिस्टर होते हैं. ठीक है, और वो आपको जो है एक ग्रुप जो है वो मिलेगा. अगर मैं आपको शर्तिया कह सकता हूँ कि अगर आप पाकिस्तान में जाएंगे, वहाँ पे 3 या 4 इस वक्त जारी होगी, वर्कशॉपिंग होगी, चाइल्ड प्रोटेक्शन, एक होगी विमेन एंड क्लाइमेट चेंज, एक होगी वाटर स्केर्सिटी, एंड यू हैव द सेम पीपल in all three.
Nobody talks about buffaloes and climate change.
तो ये प्रॉब्लम जो है, और ये सिर्फ यहाँ नहीं है, ये ग्लोबल मसला है, लेकिन यहाँ पे ज्यादा इंटेंस इसलिए है, जो नदीम साहब ने कहा है कि हमने जो अपनी लोकल यूनिवर्सिटीज की कैपेसिटी है, चाहे वो स्टूडेंट्स हो, प्रोफेसर्स हो, रिसर्चर्स हो, हमने उनमें इन्वेस्ट नहीं करते और उनको मौका भी नहीं देते. Because it's again, I mean, how many times do we hear or see?
क्या मौका देंगे, मैंने प्लानिंग कमीशन में फर्स्ट फ्लोर पे लाइब्रेरी बनाई, वो एक जनरल सा मेंबर इम्प्लीमेंटेशन मुकर्रर हुआ, आदि दफ्तर बना दी।
तो नहीं लेकिन मैं ये कह रहा हूँ, देखिए मतलब इसमें बात ये था कि आई मीन वी हैव lot, so many young scholars and researchers, not just from Labis bubble, but even from other universities, private universities. पूरी एक mushroom growth हो गई है of varying quality, and there is that expertise in progress, in work in progress, और उसकी जो tapping है वो भी I think that we need to do. So I think that's okay.
Thank you very much, folks. I think this has been a very good session. I really enjoyed it. It's been wonderful. Thank you, Raza. You're always welcome here. We hope that you'll come here more often. I know we can't pay you as much as the TP, but in fact, we pay you nothing. But nevertheless, thank you, folks. Tea will be served upstairs, which is a lovely view, so I urge you to come up there and we can have a little bit of conversation before we depart. All the best. Thank you.